Welcome to Your Movie Rocks, an alternate ending podcast where all movies are great movies. My guest for this recording is a somewhat familiar voice if you have been listening to the main podcast. Also, one of my fantastic writing and chatting buddies from time to time, and an all around stand up fellow, Andrew Milne. Welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Mandy. Thanks very much for having me. And yeah, I thank you for indulging me on this particular endeavor.
That is one word for what I have done, certainly. So if this is your first time listening to this incarnation of the show, here is how it works. Every show, my guest will assign me a movie to watch, and we will discuss the movie just like the 10,000 other movie podcasts that you've listened to, except that there's a catch. No matter what, I am only allowed to say nice things about the movie. My guest can say whatever they want, but me? Only nice things. And furthermore, only sincere nice things, not I loved it when there was a thunderstorm and lightning struck my TV and I couldn't watch the movie anymore. If I have nothing nice to say, I'm lying because every movie does something right. So, in contrast to last month's Your Movie Rocks, when Gavin McDowell and I got a little out of control on our discussion of church history and late
That's
antiquity,
it.
this is kind of a complete 180 in that I knew absolutely nothing about anything related to the movie that Andrew assigned me
Yeah,
going into it.
yeah. A curveball is kind of where I'm kind of hoping to get to. After Agora, I think this is pretty about as far out of left field as you could possibly get to, is
Just
my
about,
hope.
and that is the spirit that we embrace around here. So well done in that regard. What that
Definitely,
means, though, is
definitely.
that it is going to be especially necessary for you to explain, Andrew, to the listeners what the movie that we watched is and why you chose it.
Okay, good. So there's a few dovetailing things that we want to get to here. So the name of the movie we're addressing today is Crazy Samurai Musashi. This is a Japanese movie. Came out in 2020. It is occasionally billed as Crazy Samurai 400 versus 1. It's a bit of an Edge of Tomorrow situation where the tagline kind of overwrote the actual title at some point. Um, so this was directed by Yuji Shimomura. As I say, it came out in 2020, although my understanding is it was actually filmed back in 2011. Um, it's a period piece starring martial arts action star Tak Sakaguchi, who's been a feature of low budget genre films in Japan for a couple of decades now at this point. Always sort of trying to find his niche and never like getting there, it always seems to me. And
Interesting.
the yeah, so the pitch for this, and this is a bit of an interesting one. So Sakaguchi is playing a real figure, a real historical character, Miyamoto Musashi. He's kind of a bit of a legend, a bit of a folk hero, someone who actually did exist in the early 17th century, um, lived, apparently was a participant in the Battle of Sekigahara. By all accounts, one of the greatest swordsmen who ever lived and has been the subject of many, many other movies and adaptations over the centuries since he was alive. His life was subject to a lot of embellishment. He was played in the 60s, I think it was, actually by Toshiro Mifune in the Samurai trilogy.
I was going to say that's a
So
name I know.
yeah, yeah. So like very established name, very bit of a Robin Hood sort of figure. This film finds him at loggerheads with the Yoshioka clan for reasons that are not elaborated upon. And I don't think we'll need to get too far into the plot. This is not, shall we say, a narratively dense feature.
I was going to say, I'm sorry, did you say plot?
Yeah, so quite. So we're introduced, and it looks for a moment when we start off that there's going to be plot because like we
This is true.
so we start off with a scene um detailing the background to this conflict that Musashi has already killed like the two um primary heirs apparent to this clan. Um he's set up to kill the third, which is this young child, the heir apparent who's just like an 11-year-old boy. And his seniors have all set up this ambush in the woods for him. So when he arrives, there are 100 members of the clan and 300 mercenaries that they've hired, all of whom are kind of in tension with each other. And it seems like there's all these sort of internecine politics going on about who's going to claim the right to kill Musashi and um, how this is all going to play out. And this takes us up right up until about the 8 minute mark, which is when the film's USP kicks in. So Musashi successfully, in a really, I think, really striking shot, descends from the trees, slices through a butterfly in midair, and kills his child target in one stroke. And thereafter has to fight his way through 400 people who are lying in ambush for him in these woods to get to safety, and does so with a sword, one at a time, over the course of an uninterrupted 77-minute cracking shot. And
And
that's
that
the
is the
film.
entire reason for the season. Yes.
So, so Mandy, I'm curious to hear, did you love this movie?
I loved this movie. So here is, at the risk of getting a little bit too faux profound, here is my read on what this movie is experimenting with. So, as you noted, and you know far more about Musashi Miyamoto than I do, this was the first time I'd ever heard of him. My knowledge of historical Japan could leave ample room on the head of a pin.
Fair.
But as you said, he is something of kind of an almost mythic character
Hmm.
In Japanese folk stories at this point. And to me, this whole thing felt like a strange exercise in almost anti-mythologizing him. So this
I
was
agree.
it's like a subversion of an origin story almost. Because
Hmm.
normally this sort of thing would be part of a traditional hero's journey where, you know, the hero is being set upon by all of his various enemies, and Odysseus style, he has to cut through them all in order to get home, get to his wife, reconquer his kingdom, whatever it is he needs to do. So here, the way that it is set up, Musashi is initially introduced, at least you think he's going to be introduced as the villain of the story. Because
Hmm.
in those initial, I guess, 8 minutes or so, we have a series of relationships and conflicts and bits of political intrigue set up, none of which pay off. You just know that
Hmm.
all of these people are here because they hate Musashi and they want him dead, and he killed their friend in some way that they all seem to think is quite dishonorable, and they are here to avenge their friend slash previous clan leader. That, of course, does not happen because he drives through them all with a samurai sword shaped lawnmower.
Exactly.
But during the actual fight, which is the vast, vast, vast majority of the film, the very first thing you see him do is kill a kid. And in the
Yeah.
first 8 minutes of the movie, which are the most traditionally cinematic part of the movie, aside from the end, which we'll get to later, the kid is actually set up to be quite adorable. Like you are given an amount of emotional attachment to the kid because the very first thing you see him do is smile at a butterfly, a very
Exactly.
obviously fake butterfly that they will use over and over again, but that's not the point. You see him looking very out of place in his too big chieftain robes and talking to the attractive young Japanese man who is obviously his mentor. And in any
Hmm.
other movie, these guys would be the heroes. And also the attractive young Japanese man whose name is Chusuke, I want to say. Is that how you say it?
I think so. Chusuke.
He has this monologue about how like his goal is to uphold the honor of the clan and protect the kid and protect the old man who's clearly his mentor and get rid of Musashi. Within the first 10 minutes of the movie, this is no longer a concern because both of those people are dead, and now we're following Musashi mostly from the back from here on out. Until the
Hmm.
last portion of the movie, we see astonishingly little of Musashi's face. And then, as Tak Sakaguchi gets more and more tired, they start to indulge in more close ups on his exhausted looking eyes and
Yes.
his sweat oozing pores and things like that. But at no point is this really made to look glamorous or to make you feel really anything at all for Musashi, aside from being impressed with the endurance test that they've put this actor through because he's not a character. I could not tell you a single thing about him except like he has a lot of stamina and is pretty okay with a sword. The killing is not flashy, at least not during the
No.
77-minute take. We don't know what his motivation is or why he's doing any of this or if he has a family or what he's going to do after this is over. He's just a guy who is here killing a whole bunch of people. And despite the fact that the sales pitch for the movie seems like it is, casting this as a sort of epic, like, oh, 77-minute
Mhm.
fight scene. How could you get more epic than that? The epic quality is consciously removed from it at every moment.
I'm
And I
I'm
found that to
really
be such an
yeah.
interesting experiment in this kind of filmmaking.
I'm really gratified that you came up with all those points just independently of me. This is part of the reason that that's part of the reason I wanted to pick this film in the first place. Because I wanted to do something a little bit with this episode, like what Tim and Brennan were doing with Sucker Punch and The Bye Bye Man,
Hmm.
respectively, both of whom I think had very viscerally negative reactions when they originally saw those movies in the theater, and then sort of wanted to reinterpret their own reaction to those films and sort of relitigate their own responses. I felt kind of similarly about that because I was anticipating this film when it was new. I'd actually seen Shimomura and Sakaguchi's previous collaboration, Reborn,
Oh,
back when
okay.
that came out in
So
like
these were not, these
2018, I
guys were
think.
not new to each other.
No, they weren't new to each other. I think they've been working together for decades, actually. I think they go all the way back to like 2006 with Shimomura's first feature. So this was a collaboration that was sort of a long time in the making. So it was kind of hyped up. This is sort of a film that was like it was part of the conversation once you get a couple of layers deep into action movie fandom. And like you say, the sort of pitch of, it's a 77-minute fight scene. Like, how can you get more epic than that? And then I watched it with that kind of expectation, and I came away with the reaction, well, that was fucking unwatchable. I felt so betrayed, like this promise of the coolest thing that, like, how did they ever execute this? A 77-minute tracking shot that's all killing. Well, it turns out the way to execute that is to make it look like, strip it of all the sort of production values that we associate with a mainstream movie, is the thing. And in subsequent years, like, it just sort of stuck in my brain like a splinter. Like, it's something that I kept thinking about and thinking about, and just wondering if I was watching it the right way is the thing. It's not a commonly held read of this film, but it is out there that it's doing something avant-garde. And
I feel like it has to be
it has to be, right? Because
because
I was one.
we'll get to this later on because I want to save the ending for a little bit, but this director clearly knows how to make a traditional action movie. This is not a
Exactly,
matter
yeah.
of incompetence. So this was a choice that was made.
Yeah, so I spent the year since I saw it the first time wondering, is this slow cinema like what Tim talks about? Is this in fact the Jean Dielman of samurai action movies?
Now, that is
And
a
I can't.
sentence I never anticipated anyone uttering in the history of cinema.
So, but yeah, that's the kind of curveballs we like to bring to this show, I guess. So I think it's worth noting first up, as far as I can tell, I've not been able to confirm this outright, but it certainly seems to be the case that this is an unsimulated oneer. There's
Okay, I wondered about that because there were a couple of moments when I was like, is that a hidden cut? But I wasn't sure about any of them. There's like a moment where a guy seems to fall into the camera that I wondered
hmm,
about, and another moment where the camera kind of creeps behind a building that I wondered about. But aside from that, I didn't detect any hidden cuts.
there's a very cheeky moment. I almost wonder if this was intentional. Less than a minute into the oneer, the camera pushes in on Sakaguchi's back, and that's like the go-to method of hiding a cut during a one-take action sequence. You see that all the time,
But also, like,
and I
that's a
thought, like,
minute in. Why do you need a fake cut there?
exactly, and it's not even like they were doing anything particularly strenuous. So it almost seems like a sort of sop to the audience is
Hmm.
the thought that I had. Like, are they sort of fucking with us on more than one level? Because like I had the thought, oh, is this actually just a fake one, or are they actually just stitching this
Hmm.
together from a bunch of takes? And then it never happens again.
And also, like, Sakaguchi looks exhausted by the time the oneer is over.
He looks so knackered by the end of it. And I think that that's a big part of the emotional investment I had by the end of that final fight in the courtyard, which is, yeah, like he's just stumbling around, like he looks dead on his feet. I can't
It's just like
imagine what it would have to.
forget anybody stabbing him. I'm just worried that his heart's going to give out.
That's it. I don't think this is kind of the appeal of one take shots to me because I've watched a lot of action movies in the last, 10, 15 years that feature long takes like this. You've got your Atomic Blonde, you've got your
Hmm.
Extraction 2. You have the James Nunn movies, One Shot and One More Shot, which are aptly named. Those actually are simulated boners, but they are still stitching together very long takes. And it's kind of an element that gives cinema like almost the quality of live performance, where it's not just that you're emotionally engaged with the narrative content, but it's also the tension of can the performers get through this without fucking up,
Hmm.
and that's the interesting part, and just the kind of stamina and endurance in real life of can they pull this off.
This is only tangentially related, but I promise it will come back to it. Did I hear or read or something correctly that this movie was actually made quite a few years before it was released?
Yes, as I understand it, I think it was shot in 2011, so Sakaguchi would have been about 35.
Okay, this was my point because that at least means that I don't need to go kill myself in despair that a guy in his 40s was doing this 77-minute oneer.
Oh no, fair enough. I had the same thought. Like that did come as a bit of a relief to me.
Yeah,
Like I
like,
mean,
oh, okay. Middle-aged guy doing this out here. Let me go feel bad about myself now.
no, I get it. So, but I mean, Sakaguchi, if you've seen some of his other stuff, he is the real deal. Like he has some of the sharpest reflexes in this whole business.
I was gonna say now that
Um,
he's 50, I'm sure he could still probably do it, but at least I don't have to watch the proof of it on screen.
no, that's it. But unfortunately, Sakaguchi is quite cancelled these days. It turns out.
Aw.
But yeah, I know I wasn't happy about it either. But with this, I was already aware of this film and had seen it before we started, so I figure I'm going to give myself a mulligan on this one.
It's
But
fine. And also, I have no idea why he's canceled, but I'm also just like, you know what? Whatever he did, it's probably no worse than what Errol Flynn did back when he was a celebrated working
this
actor. So,
this is real. So yeah, we need to sort of draw a line under these things sometimes.
mhm.
But so the other point about this one is it's all shot outdoors in natural light. Frankly speaking, it looks like hot garbage.
It does.
It look
That's an
it,
objective statement. It's not a negative about the movie.
no, it looks like it was shot on an iPhone. For all I know, it might actually have been. It's all done in natural light. It's all very overexposed. It's all like digital and grainy, and there's basically no modulation of the light levels in post production. So it basically just looks kind of like guys in a park playing at being samurai.
It looks a little actually like the place in rural North Carolina where my college friends and I used to play outdoor laser
Hmm.
tag.
Well, that's interesting. That's actually a point. The actual setting, the village where this all takes place, the camera's moving in and out of all these sort of 16th, 17th
Hmm.
century structures, all of which appear to have been abandoned. I don't believe for a second that these were built to spec for the film. I suspect these kind of places just exist either as film sets or just in real life in rural Japan.
Though, if you did not know Musashi's biography, and I actually have no idea whether these are period accurate costumes, but assuming they were anything about Japanese ritual clothing in the 17th century, you would have no reason to suspect that this was taking place in the 17th century. There is no time period establishment done. What there is done, though, and this is my second kind of grand theory of this movie that works in tandem with my first grand theory of this movie, is that this is a video game that you do not play. Now,
Yes.
the thing about video games is that most people who are enthusiastic about video games prefer to play them. So I don't know why. I'm not necessarily sure what the mass appeal of a video game that you don't play is. However, because I have absolutely garbage hand-eye coordination, I actually do really enjoy watching other people play video games and not having to
I
play
think you
them
mentioned
myself.
this. Yeah, I think you mentioned this in the Sucker Punch episode, which is actually put a pin in that. The thing about Shimomura, his background, he's directed a handful of features, but most of his career was spent as either a second unit director, but he also did a bunch of directing for cinematic for video games,
Okay.
including the Bayonetta and the Devil May Cry series. So this is the guy who's responsible for those kind of really high-end, excessive cinematics that you get at the start of those games.
I can see it absolutely. Though that is funny because I would not even describe this as a particularly cinematic video game.
No, it's like he brought the sort of cinematic sensibility to those cutscenes, and now he's bringing
Mhm.
the video game sensibility to live action cinema. It's a
What it
weird sort of
what it is though is that it's mostly told, especially for the first half of the oneer, in a very close third person perspective. Like you're following
mhm.
Musashi's back for a large portion of
Yeah.
the film.
I
There are a lot of repeated movements to the point where you might as well assign some of them to the A button and the X button and the Y button and the left trigger and all that jazz. There are a couple of very distinct boss fights interspersed
mhm.
throughout. Like there's the guy who has the chain, who looks like he's actually going to be a tough opponent for a moment, and then, Musashi makes a hash of him in about 20 seconds, but sometimes that happens with a first boss fight. There are the random item pickups interspersed throughout the movie, where he keeps finding these identical water bottles scattered throughout
Yes.
the arena that he's in, and then eventually also starts finding like food and extra swords and stuff like that. And there is also a different soundtrack for each part of the arena. I loved the music in this movie. It took a
Oh,
little bit to warm on me, but when I thought about it, I really, really love the soundtrack.
that's interesting because I have thoughts about the soundtrack is the thing, and it sort of ties into to what you were saying. Um, like you said, there's the boss fight with the guy on the chain, which is it almost reads as a troll. Like it almost
Yes.
reads as like a gag. Because they have this sort of dialogue establishing like Musashi has some history with this guy,
Uh-huh.
and he's given this sort of like characteristic design, and he's played by this very buff actor with his shirt off, so to sort of
And he's
distinguish him
swinging
from
this chain like he's about to wrap it around Musashi's
yeah,
neck.
yeah, and he dies in one hit.
Yep.
And this is something that keeps coming back over and over throughout the film. Keeps introducing these kind of beats that make it feel like there's going to be some kind of variation or there's going to be some kind of modulation or arc introduced, something to sort of break up the monotony of him just bonking these same 30 or 40 guys on the head over and over again. And then like it just sort of pulls back and he just keeps doing the same thing.
It never
And
pays off.
yeah, and it feels like the film is taunting you almost. Like, and this is why I keep coming back to the idea that this has to be intentional, because yeah, we're deliberately pulling back on all the things that would introduce some kind of variance into this scenario, and like making a spectacle of how conspicuously we're not doing that.
You so clearly know what you're doing and are choosing not to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like what you were saying. I think the phrase you used was like anti-myth making,
Hmm.
which is yeah, I feel exactly the same way. I mean, you hear, you know, the story about Hercules killing the Hydra, right?
Yeah.
He has to cut down this whole forest to like cauterize the necks every time he cuts one off. And like on the one hand, like in the abstract, that's a really compelling, epic, heroic story. Like that's a great deed that one of these figures from folklore did. But also, if you think about it, if you were watching that happen in real time, it would be the most tedious thing.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's kind of what's true of a lot of great deeds. They don't happen as these sort of moments of epiphany. They happen as just sort of grinding out and just doing the same thing over and over and over again until you finally arrive at an endpoint. And I think that's kind of it's an interesting, almost sort of Dadaist, avant-garde thing to do. And I really want to believe that they were doing this on purpose.
It feels like a different version of the same kind of subversion that the guys who made Primer, which I haven't seen, but I know about the movie and
Mm,
what it is, said it was their goal to do, where like they wanted to remove the sense of glamour and show the gritty, hard, confusing work that would actually go into creating something as complicated as time travel. Here we're showing the gritty, hard, exhausting work that would go into something like slaying the Hydra or taking down 400 dueling opponents.
exactly. Yeah, this is my thinking. And the thing that I keep coming back to, though, is would this be effective if the film looked better and was better choreographed? Would that still come across?
I don't
Because
know.
the thing is, the choreography is bad. Like, is what I keep getting hung up on. I don't know that you could make it much better for 77 minutes uninterrupted, because that's the thing. Any mistake, any fall, or anyone getting hurt, then you're back to square one and you have to start your day over. So there's a limit to how convincing any of this can look,
Hmm.
but my God, it does not look convincing.
The choreography is repetitive, which again
Hmm.
plays into the video game element of it, I think, because there's only so many sword moves you can do in a boss fight.
Yeah, and like you say, like it does feel like there are individual moves mapped to the A button or the X button
Yeah.
because there are something that stood out to me on this rewatch is all of the extras are wearing these same white headbands. They all have also very floppy haircuts that are sort of sticking out above those hairbands, and
Did they
it
have
became
400
obvious.
copies of the same wig that they gave out?
I think their heads are padded. Is the thing. I think
Oh,
I
that
think
sort of
that's
makes
what's going
sense.
on there. Yeah, because one thing that Sakaguchi does over and over and over again is he just bonks him on the head, which
The
I'm
first
fairly sure is not a legit Bushido.
the first couple of times he did that, I said to myself, "Wait, they're not dead from that, are they? Like they're gonna get up." No, that was how he killed them. Just a single bonk on the head with the sword.
Yeah, and the DVD that I have or the Blu-ray that I have for this film, it says on the back, it's rated 18 by the BBFC for strong bloody violence. That
What
almost feels
bloody
disingenuous
violence.
because
There are
the
splashes of extremely fake blood when
yeah, the
many
blood is
of
comped in
the
so poorly.
his, his sword is completely clean by the end of this fight.
It is. It completely is. So yeah, the one sort of the only thing that really sort of acts as a kind of visceral testimony to the sort of physicality of this world is how knackered Sakaguchi looks.
There's also
And
the camera very briefly turns to a corpse with its eyes rolled back at one point, which was like their one nod to, oh yeah, he's killed a whole bunch of people in the course of this.
that's it. And that's the other thing, because there absolutely aren't 400 extras. It's probably closer to like two or three dozen.
I knew I was going
And
to make myself
whenever
insane if I started counting either deaths or obvious doubling.
no, but like even because the camera doesn't really focus in on any of the extras, but
No.
even you have to assume because we don't really see any dead bodies or very few, and there's certainly not 400. And a lot of the time, these guys are getting slashed across the waist, and then they'll go stumbling for about 60 yards until they manage to carry themselves out of the frame into the background, where they're clearly just being cycled out into the back into the fold.
Yep. It's like, okay, stumble out of the frame, go take a drink of water, and then get back in your next place.
It's sort of like watching, I don't know, one of those stunt spectaculars at a theme park almost.
A
But
little bit, yeah. And then also video game element here. This again, not a negative, simply an objective fact. The 400 samurai and mercenaries that Musashi is fighting are hilariously incompetent.
they just make all these sort of lunges that clearly would never connect, and they're obviously just opening themselves up just to be flashed across the waist. It looks like somebody playing the original Assassin's Creed
Yep. And
on easy mode.
at no point does it occur to any of them that they might, for example, attack him at the same time as somebody else or stab him in the back.
No, exactly. But I mean, this is sort of a common criticism of martial arts movies
Mhm,
since the beginning of time, really. Like, why don't they just all rush him at once? And that's something that you can sort of forgive in the context
mhm.
of like a Bruce Lee fight scene where it's being edited judiciously. But when you're just sort of locked into this real-time oneer for over an hour, it's the sort of thing that your brain inevitably starts to focus on.
Mhm.
And I think again, this is what I hope is being done intentionally, that we're being directed to by the sheer monotony and the repetitiousness of it all, we're being directed to focus on all the ways that this doesn't make sense and all the ways
Mhm.
that it doesn't actually operate, that the verisimilitude doesn't track.
And I stopped letting it bother me the moment I tuned into I'm watching somebody play a video game.
Yeah, yeah. And again, as we were saying, the final scene kind of acts as a counterpoint to everything we've just been talking
It
about.
does because the final scene is amazing.
The final scene is really good. It's like all of a sudden you realize, oh, Shimomura actually knows how to direct an action scene
We do this
and
flash
does so.
forward to 7 years later, where Musashi is sitting by the river in the same place, I guess. I don't know. There is no indication as to whether or not we've moved. And I think that's still Chusuke, right?
Yeah, it's still Chusuke. It's the same character that we were introduced to at the beginning of the film, and now we're just sort of looping back to him at the end,
So
and
he comes
yeah.
back again with the same 3 dozen extras to, I guess, try this all again. And then we launch into a very traditional action movie fight scene, where this time you can see that Musashi is older, he is tired, he doesn't want to be here, he really doesn't want to do this, but as soon as he is forced into it, he's right back to the action man. And this time, there are quick cuts. The choreography is fantastic. There are midair kicks. There's all the kind of stuff that you would normally expect. I say this like I know what people expect from martial arts movies, but this is certainly the sort of thing I would expect from a martial arts movie. And it looks so good, and the pacing is so good. And it lasts for about 2.5 minutes of this 91-minute movie. But I was
Yeah, and then
so excited to see it. I don't think I've ever been
the
more excited for a movie finale.
I know it's just the contrast is so stark. I think the final line is quite telling, where I think Musashi is asked like who he is, and he announces, "I am," ellipsis, and then
And
it
then
cuts to the
Crazy
title card.
Samurai 400 versus 1.
Yes, yeah. So it's almost like this 7 years later segment is when the myth has sort of kicked in, and now we're seeing the mythologized version to stand in contrast with the grind it out reality of the film up to that point. Yeah, I just really want to believe that is the thing. But the thing is, there's nothing about Shimomura's career up to this point that suggests to me that he's interested in doing something this introspective. And
Even
that's
if
sort of
he
why I get hung up on.
even if he didn't do it intentionally though, does that mean he didn't do it?
Yeah, that's the thing, because it did get people having conversations like this one, because it is an idea that's been floated out there. The film wasn't well received, like at all.
Oh, I'm sure.
It has a negative Rotten Tomatoes score from both viewers and critics. It
Well,
kind of
because
got
I'm sure
buried
people
in.
went into it like you
Yeah,
did, where it sounded like the most epic thing you were ever going to see, and then people went into it and was like, what is this creepy crawler of a movie I just watched?"
I think so. And like whatever else it was definitely pitched to the wrong audience. So I wonder if there is sort of an afterlife for this, if there is something here to be reclaimed.
So in a way, I think you did even better with this pick than you thought you did, because I think I might be a good audience for this movie. I don't know about the
Maybe.
ideal audience for the movie, but I am not an action movie person. Like, I tend to find action movies kind of boring. I prefer my dialogue dense character development. And sometimes my like sweeping panoramas of fantastical worlds. I'm not one of the people racing out to see Tom Cruise die in the new Mission Impossible movie. But when
Yeah.
we got to that final scene after all of this, I had this moment of like, I understand why people love action movies. I understand what's so exciting
Interesting.
about this.
Okay, great. That's good to hear. No, like so maybe I was onto a winner with this one. I hope so.
Like, I don't know that I'm still not going to rush out to watch Tom Cruise die, but I maybe have gained a little bit more understanding of the people who are. In terms of other stuff that the movie did really well, can we talk for a moment? Can we backtrack all the way to Musashi's entrance? Because holy
Oh yeah.
shit, that entrance.
I think I mentioned this,
You
like the
did, yeah.
descent from the trees. Like that's just a great shot. The chopping through, because the butterfly's been established as this sort of like signifier of innocence for this wee boy, and like he just bisects it in midair with the same stroke that he uses to chop down the same child. His face is only seen in shadow, and he has this close up where he says, "Let's get this started." And that's the last time we see his face for like the next 10 minutes.
I think I said holy shit out loud when that entrance happened.
Man,
Like we said, he's not much of a character, but what a character introduction.
no, 100% agreed. And I think it is probably banking on a certain cultural familiarity with Musashi, because, like as I say, like he's a bit of a folk hero. He's been around the bases. It's banking on an audience who's heard this name before. But if this is going to be a wild way to encounter the character of Miyamoto Musashi for the first time,
No kidding. And there's so little
100%.
dialogue that everything he says like that stands out. I
Yeah,
forgot to
I think
mention
he.
from the ending, his line to after Chusuke starts lecturing him about duty and honor, he says something along the lines of duty, honor? Who gives a shit? I just want to win.
And apparently that's kind of his reputation. Like
Interesting.
apocryphally. He was known as a duelist, and historically, he wrote a bunch of texts about the sort of art of swordsmanship, and which I haven't read. Like, I'm not like an expert in this regard, but my understanding, like just on like a cursory glance at Wikipedia, is that that was kind of his thing. Just be brusque, be direct. Don't get hung up on sort of flashy moves or techniques or honor. Your job is to kill the other guy, so do it.
But it's so the opposite of what at least, we Westerners think about when we think about, Japanese feudalist honor culture.
No, that's it. I mean, the whole thing about Bushido and that kind of kendo style swordplay is that it's very mannered, it's very ornamented, and yeah, it kind of feels like the film is interrogating that in a way.
And again,
But
anti-myth making.
yeah, so I think there are layers to this. I'd like to believe there are layers to this, and I don't know. It could be a death of the author thing, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
make that case.
Even if they weren't there intentionally, it doesn't mean that they're not there. That
Yeah,
is my
yeah,
that is my continual assertion about this movie in particular.
yeah.
I laughed out loud during the multiple, I keep wanting to call them scenes, even though they're not really, the
Mm.
multiple moments in the course of the 77-minute oneer where a line of identical berserkers come running up to Musashi and all get gut slashed from opposite directions in a row.
Yeah, yeah. This happens on several
It
occasions. It's
does.
just like when one over the head strike, he goes in, gets him in the guts from below, and he just does this on opposite sides over and over again. It looks like watching somebody play. I don't know if you ever played the Assassin's Creed games, especially the
I
early
have
ones.
watched my husband play some Assassin's Creed games.
Yeah. So that's exactly what playing those feel like because they're all based on counterfighting. You just wait for the opponent to do something, you press one button, and you win every time. Like the timing isn't even very difficult to get right. It's just a question of patience, and it feels like watching that essentially.
A little bit now that you mention it, yeah. Um, there are also a couple of the most tense moment in the movie, as far
Hmm.
as I was concerned, was when he found the girl in one of the houses. And the girl is
Yeah.
carrying a bundle of firewood, and he starts making that like shh kind of gesture at her. And I
Hmm.
was sitting there going, is she gonna drop the firewood? Is she gonna drop the
Oh.
firewood and alert them to his presence? Because they stand there just looking at each other for quite a lengthy period of time. And I felt myself consciously relax after she started to walk away from him without dropping the firewood. Of course, she immediately then gives away his position anyway.
Yeah.
But it was set up also at that moment of like, okay, she's gonna walk away. They're gonna have to work to find him. Until then, she starts yelling "samurai, samurai" to alert them
Yeah.
to where he is. But that moment's really tense.
It is. That works quite well, I thought. And there's an interesting point that throughout the film, there are these sort of breaks in between the waves of enemies that he has to fight.
Mhm.
And as you mentioned, like he keeps finding these sort of bottles of water that he'll take sips from and sort of spit over himself and his sword. And I realized on this rewatch, because again, you're sort of paying attention to details other than the action because of the monotony of it. I realized, oh, these are actually breaks for Sakaguchi. It's not part of the choreography. They're actually giving the actor a chance to hydrate and rest a little bit in between these sort of moments of the shot, which ties back into the sort of performance, the live performance aspect of the whole thing.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right there. And on the note of the live performance as well, we mentioned the soundtrack earlier and then didn't really talk about it. And I got the impression from what you said that you were not quite as warm on the soundtrack that as I was.
Well, the soundtrack itself is good. The music is well performed. Like there's a lot of instances of taiko drums interplaying with
Hmm.
these sort of weeping string sections. What I found curious is that it doesn't really seem to be tied to anything.
Nope.
This is actually another. There's the whole sort of final stretch in the courtyard where he's like, it goes on for something like 20 uninterrupted minutes of just one person after another.
And it is
And
set either to silence or to exceptionally weepy piano music.
yeah, and at one point, like these sort of weepy, almost Samuel Barber adagio for strings
Hmm.
score plays itself out, and then there's a moment of silence, and then the sort of more rousing taiko drum driven action theme kicks back in, and he just keeps doing the same thing, and it's another instance of like is the movie sort of messing with our ability to recognize these cues?
So what I loved here was the progression of the music because early on when the
Mm,
music kicks in, it's all taiko drums, which again is the sort of thing that we expect. It's very Japanese, it's very beat driven, it's very action-y. It's the sort of thing that you expect a fight scene like this to be set to. The taiko drums kind of phase out as the movie goes along until we get to the final arena and that remaining probably, yeah, 20 minutes or so, is set to this very slow, sleepy piano piece. The thing that
Hmm.
it reminded me the most of was the music that plays during the last few minutes of each third day cycle in The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which I
Oh,
have no
interesting.
idea whether you've played.
I have not played Majora's Mask. I've played a couple of Zelda games. That's not one of them.
Okay, so Majora's Mask is one of my favorite Zelda games, and one of its shticks is that the moon is about to collide into the Earth, and
Hmm.
it's going to do so in 3 days. And you will reset those 3 days over and over again as you play the game. But if you don't reset the 3 days, if you want to watch the moon crash into the Earth at some point, which everybody does, you will eventually get to the moment where the world is clearly ending and everybody is either panicking or has resigned themselves to their fate. And this terribly sad music plays over the
Oh,
background and replaces every single other piece of music in the game because normally in a Zelda game, every area has its own music, every boss fight has its own music, etc., etc. No matter what you are doing, if you reach this time of day, that music will be playing. It's a very slow, contemplative, low-pitched, sad piece. And that's what it reminded me of because
yeah.
it felt like the music of resignation
That's interesting.
and exhaustion.
I'm actually just looking just now what the composer's name was. Oh, Hidehiro Kawai, apparently is the composer's name, who I don't think I'm familiar with his work from anything else. So yeah, ignore me. But yeah, I take the point that it feels like, yeah, just let's get this done, set to set to music. I don't know, it feels like it's going for something poignant, and it feels like the music is the source of that poignancy, and that we're just trying to
Yes.
map it onto these sequences. Keeps coming back around to how do we create meaning out of this footage.
And just as we could heighten the energy of this scene by including cuts, we could heighten the energy of this scene by including an action movie soundtrack, and we're going to
Hmm.
do neither of those things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like the whole thing feels like strange exercise in self-abnegation and self-denial. It's a strangely artful object, isn't it?
It is. Though, of course, then we get to the final fight set during the rainstorm that curiously disappears as soon as said fight is over.
I was wondering how they achieved that, to be honest. I think some of the rainfall is comped in, but not all of it.
It's gotta be because the rain is so heavy, and Musashi
Yeah.
doesn't look that soaked when he comes out of
No,
it.
yeah. But the thing is, we see over the course of the film, the whole thing takes place in late afternoon, which is kind of something that testifies to the reality of the continuous cut, because the
Hmm.
shadows and the quality of the light is contiguous. But over the course of the shoots, we do see that the sky is getting more overcast. I think
Yeah.
it's taking place in the late autumn. And I wonder to what extent that could possibly have been planned for. And that's
Interesting.
just, yeah, how the hell did they do that behind the scenes? Or is it just like a happy accident? Could be
It must
any
it
number of
must have
things.
been because even if they, like you've got to schedule these things considerably in advance, long before you know what the weather forecast is going to be.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. So even if they did multiple takes, they,
Which
they
for
couldn't
talk's
sort of.
sake, God, I hope they didn't.
That's but again, it's just one of these questions that once you start thinking about it, it just lodges in your brain like a splinter.
Yeah, no, I would be curious to know, but until then, I feel like we just have to assume that they got lucky because the whole thing is lit naturally. They did not bother buying movie equipment for their movie set. They picked an interesting arena choice for this because, as you pointed out, it looks like a park, but it also doesn't look like a well-maintained park. Everything is very dry, everything is dead and decaying. It looks like a place where
Yeah.
humans have not been for a very long time.
Yeah, my assumption was that in the fiction of the film that this was maybe a village that had been cleared out in the course of the civil war that was in Japan at the time. I can't really speak to that. It's not really something the film clues us in on one way or the other. As you say, there's not really any. You wouldn't be able to know this was the 17th century unless you knew that from the costuming, and that's a level of detail that I'm not privy to. Yeah, I imagine because this is the sort of era of the Tokugawa shogunate and the Battle of Sekigahara, which is a very fertile period in Japanese period drama. It's the time that Kagemusha takes place, for instance.
Okay.
So yeah, I imagine there are a lot of sets like that available for use around the country. I'd have to research that more thoroughly, but it seems like there's no shortage of these kind of sets for Jidaigeki. You don't tend to see them in these kind of continuous cuts that insist on their sort of present day reality the way that you would in a Kurosawa movie, though.
No, that's very, very true. Of course, Kurosawa is, making movies, whereas over here we seem to be making an experiment disguised as a movie, but it remains a fascinating experiment.
Yeah, 100%. Does this count as a movie? I mean, it is a movie. Of course, it's a movie. But we talk about how the essence of cinema is editing. And I always think that the conspicuous refusal to edit almost feels like we're flirting with a different medium. And as, cameras have got lighter and rigging has got lighter and, post-production suites have got more accessible over the years, it almost feels like we're seeing the kind of emergence of a new grammar. At a higher budget level, we're seeing folks like Alejandro Inarritu,
Mm-hmm.
who directed Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban.
Quaron.
Cuarón, yes, thank you, and presumably other directors who aren't from Mexico. But yeah, it feels like there's sort of this emergence of a new grammar that's influenced by video games in a lot of
Mhm.
respects, and that influence is being traded back and forth over the years.
I have not seen very many of the other movies currently primarily famous for one takes, which like Birdman, 1917, I know those are fake one takes, but they're still
Yeah,
set
yeah.
up to look like one takes. But when I have, my overwhelming response to them has generally been, okay, but why? Like, what did you achieve here that you couldn't necessarily have achieved doing this the traditional way? Aside from you get to brag about how your movie looks like it was all done in one take. This
Oh,
one,
100%. I think a lot of the time it is a dick measuring contest.
yeah, this one, like, kind of the same, but also kind of not. It feels more purposeful than any of the others I've seen, which is a really low bar, but it pleases me that we're starting to step lightly over that low bar.
Yeah. So I guess what we're saying here is Emmanuel Lubetsky, get on Tak Sakaguchi's level.
Seriously. It seems like we're about coming to a close on this movie, so the next question for you is how much did I really like it?
So here's the thing. I set out for this episode. Part of the reason I picked this movie, in addition to the ones I've laid out, is that I wanted to stress test this format. Um, because we've known each other for a couple of years now. Like, what
Hmm.
would you say, like 2, 3 years? I think I've probably got like a handle on your taste.
Hmm.
So I was specifically going out of my way here to find a movie that Mandy would have to stretch herself to say nice things about. I would be astonished if you gave this higher than 1 star.
Interesting. Can you see it?
A 3. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. All right.
I respect it more than I like it, I think. Like
Yeah, I take that point.
I'm not going to race out and watch it again. I was definitely looking at the clock by the end of the 77-minute fight scene.
Oh my goodness.
But I'm going to be thinking about it for a while. And it's not,
Yeah.
it's and I'm not going to be thinking about it for a while for the same reason that I would be thinking about, for example, Birdemic for a while. Like it's not because it's hilariously incompetent. I think that whether it means to be or not, it's doing some really engaging things with its craft and with its story. I also desperately want Tim to see it now.
Yeah. Oh man, what would Tim's read on this be? That'd be fascinating. But
That's the thing. I
this is
genuinely don't know whether he would love this or hate this, but I feel like it's going to be one of the two.
Yeah, probably. In my experience, because I hated this the first time I saw it.
Yeah, I
I
noticed.
really bounced off this hard. And the thing is, like, over the course of like rewatching it for this and talking it through with you, this has been kind of a successful exercise because I feel like I've kind of talked myself into liking it, which is, if that's not the object of this show, then what
And
is?
I love that. Yes, exactly. I'm
So
glad this
yeah,
has
good
been such a
successful
positive
exercise.
experience for us both. Yes. That's
Definitely,
that's what we
100%.
do around here. All right, well, Andrew, thank you so much for this movie that I absolutely never would have watched had you not forced me to, which again is another part of this exercise. Um,
Power of community.
and for chatting with me. And as a return on the favor of enriching my life so much, I'm going to give you a chance to inform our listeners. Andrew, where can people purchase your fantastic book?
Oh, okay. So you can find my novel. It's titled White Scar Across the Firmament. It's available on Amazon.co.uk or wherever else you get your books online. Presumably Amazon.com also. I don't know. I'm on the other side of the Atlantic over here. But if you're into laser dogfights in orbit, then I have a novel for you.
Indeed. And despite the fact that it is, again, not the sort of thing that I would normally seek out, I enjoyed it immensely, and not just because Andrew is my buddy. So
Thanks very
go,
much.
yes, so go out and get yourself a copy. So thank you so much for joining me, Andrew, and for all of you out there in listener land, it's been a pleasure, and we look forward to catching you next time on the main podcast. See you next time.